This is all put together like Lego blocks, one on top of the other, on top of the other. And so one of the dangers in doing what we're doing is that we begin to look at them as separate pieces, and we pull one out and we begin to look at that one and just leave it be and don't understand that they're all connected. They are all connected. Chapters 5 through 7 are all connected. And the introduction to his sermon is as they gathered around, as the church gathered around, some of the unbelievers are on the outside, around the fringes, they happen to come in, and he's going to start with the Beatitudes, or how should we live? What does this look like? Now that we're following him, what do we do with life? How do we respond to relationships? How do we respond to money? How do we respond and handle our time? And what do we do with those things we call kids? And Jesus is going to address all of those things. And here's what we're going to do. I want to talk about the new appetite, the consequence of the new appetite, and then we'll wrap it up with the promise of the new appetite. So the new appetite, the consequence of the appetite, and then the promise of that appetite. Let me go ahead and read all of the Sermon on the Mount, or all where we are right now, and then we'll pray. Seeing the crowds, chapter 5, follow along. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, he sat down, and his disciples, they came to him. And he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Why? For they shall be what? What's the text say? Comforted. And then it moves on and says, Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And then today we are blessed. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Let's pray. Lord, show us what that is. It seems so plain, and it is, and yet I don't know if we have a firm handle on that. Lord, show us what that looks like. For the sake of Christ and the good of our church, we pray. Amen. Let's look at the new appetite. Righteousness is our new appetite. Righteousness is our new appetite. Now, here's where we have to be careful, because this is just the logical conclusion to where he's been. He said, first, y'all, as the church, you need to realize your poverty. You've got nothing. You've got no bargaining chips. You've got nothing that you can do before God. Nothing. You can't impress him. You can't. He's not begging for you to get on his team. You're not the first one to be picked. You're not the last one. You're never picked if it's based on you. There's poverty of spirit. And if there's poverty of spirit, then we naturally mourn to the fact that, wow, I really begin to recognize my poverty. That as a man, I've got nothing. Nothing. As a woman, I've got nothing before God. And if that's true, then we begin to see who we really are. We begin to look and search and see the sin in our hearts, the selfishness in our hearts, how easily we're tempted and led astray. How easily we call the little sins when they're really not. We begin to mourn those. And if we begin to mourn, we naturally begin to look, wait a minute, if I'm poor in spirit, and if I am easily tempted and led to wickedness and sin, I don't want my will anymore. I don't want my life. I don't want to claim it's my decision, my life, my right. I'll do me. I don't want that anymore. And then Jesus gets to meekness. Because we're willing to mourn and we're willing to understand that objective reality that we're poor in spirit, we can now be willing to submit. Submit to God. We don't get freaked out by the things of this world. We're not panicky. We're not frantic. We submit to the will of God with meekness. And that's strength. And when that happens, when those three things happen by the grace of God, we then get a new appetite, a new desire, a new longing that we didn't have before. And the reason we don't have it is because we looked at we're poor. what we've been craving, what we've been going after, it doesn't cut it. And then we mourn that, and then we're submissive and meek under the will of God. And God says, now here's your new desire. Now here's what you want. And the new desire is righteousness. It cannot start. I wonder if sometimes in my life, maybe your life, that as Bible students that you are, you look and you read a verse like verse 6 and say, blessed are those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And we start there. Why am I so bored at church? Why don't I want to be a part of the body? Why do I feel so dry and dull inside? Why does my mind not naturally, why is it just not beginning to move towards things that matter and are real and are righteous? Why doesn't that happen? Does anybody ever get frustrated by things like that? Maybe it's because we haven't really thought through poverty of spirit. We haven't mourned our sin. We haven't been willing to submit. So therefore, the new desire is something distant. The new appetite is something distant. Well, first we have to look at this word righteous, and if you were to really investigate, take a magnifying glass and look at that word righteousness. If anybody pulls out a magnifying glass, I'm going to be a little freaked out. But if you were to do that, you were to look at that word, and you were to see that the makeup, the architecture of that word would be a passive, which suggests that this righteousness comes from somewhere else. This righteousness does not come from you, it doesn't come from your buddy, it doesn't come from your church. It comes from somewhere else. And who does it come from? It comes from Christ. It comes from Him. And this is directly opposed to self-righteousness. This is directly opposed to self-righteousness. Anybody self-righteous in here today? Anybody know? Hands raised. Good, because I can't stand self-righteous people. Yes, you're self-righteous. Don't you come to your own defense a lot? Don't you, when you feel convicted, don't you push away humility? There is self-righteousness in all of us, except the pastor. Here, he's a great guy. There's self-righteous in all of us, right? This is directly opposed. This is a righteousness that comes from somewhere else. If we were to look at this word righteousness, we would say, now wait a minute. The understanding of righteousness really has two components. There's two sides of the coins to this righteousness that doesn't come from ourselves. And because we would have to say, well, no one is righteous, not even one. So how do we have that new taste? How do we have that appetite? Where do we get these new taste buds? Well, first, what Jesus is assuming here is that as the church, as disciples, as followers of Jesus Christ, we already have positional righteousness. That is, that legally we stand before God. He looks at us and He says, you're absolutely forgiven. You're free. There's no sin there. You're not condemned. This is not, as our Catholic friends would say, a legal fiction where we have somehow God just pretends we didn't sin. No. We're covered by Jesus once and for all. It is a positional righteousness. This righteousness assumes a positional righteousness. If you are not right with God, if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, the next righteousness doesn't matter. It doesn't matter right now. But he is assuming positional righteousness. Salvation, theologians will call this imputation. It is an alien righteousness that we have been given, which then moves us to what righteousness he's talking about. It's not a righteousness from us. It assumes a positional righteousness. And number three, and finally getting to what I think he's talking about here, he's talking about a practical righteousness. He's talking about a practical righteousness. It's a lived out thing. It's not, are you saved? Yep, I am. Okay, good. It's how does that work its way out? How does that help me respond to life and respond to work and kids and when things fall apart? And how do I respond to the coronavirus? Whether I get it or I don't, how do I respond to that? This is salvation lived out. It's practical righteousness. It is the best way to live. It is a brand new appetite. And you and I do not have the taste buds for righteousness unless he gives it to us. So it's not a green eggs and ham theology where if God could just get us to try it. we would taste righteousness and we would say, I do like righteousness. I would eat them in a box with a fox on a train and so forth. That's not what he's saying. We have to be made new, be given positional righteousness, no condemnation, and then God says, go after practical righteousness. Taste and see the Lord is good. Go after that which is righteous. So what is righteousness practically? What does that look like? It is ultimately living a life free from the power of sin and the desire for it. It is living a life. Practical righteousness is living a life the way God intended life to be lived. And if we go back up, we have to realize we're poor. We have to realize that we need to mourn, and we have to be meek. Practical righteousness is here. And ultimately, it's in knowing Him. Righteousness and holiness are really closely linked. Holiness has the idea of being separate, being put off to the side. And holiness, the word doesn't have to just mean something good. It can mean something bad. You could be separate or holy in a sense for something that is not of God, if that makes sense. You could be set aside for something that is wrong. But there's a sense where you're separate. You're holy in that way. Righteousness comes alongside and says it's holiness, the holiness of God lived out. It's not just separate, but it's right behavior. It's right decisions. It's right wisdom. Charles Spurgeon says that to get to this point, we have to understand it is not enough just to say, oh, my sins are forgiven. Are we there in American church culture? Oh, yeah, I went to this camp, or I said this prayer, or I went here and did this, my sins are forgiven, I'm good. This is practical righteousness that says, now I have a new appetite. And so let's get to the consequence of that new appetite. The consequence of the new appetite is that we would be hungry and thirsty people. That is the consequence of this appetite. You already have a positional righteousness. Now God, because He loves you, gives you a practical righteousness, and He says, you need to hunger and thirst for it. As these disciples are sitting around, they're having a little church service that would have made perfect sense to them. You and I probably have never really hungered or thirsted, have been hungered or thirsted very long. If we ever have, these guys would have known right away what he's talking about. A lot of them would have lived and built their house and built their livelihood and raised their family in areas where there would have been food or water, because if they didn't, there was no access and they wouldn't have made it. Right? So why did you build your house by the river? Well, because of the water. Why are you living here? Because that's where the animals are that we have to hunt. And so I don't want to be. I'm not trying to be extreme, and I'm not trying to be insensitive. But in the best picture that I think that could help us understand this is think of an addict. I've got to have it, and I've got to have it now, whatever it is. That's that they would have understood hunger and thirsting for righteousness. Like that's what they pursue. That's what they're after, as we might an addict. Let me just highlight a few things that this may have communicated to them. Hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Number one, it's evident. If you and I are going to hunger and thirst for righteousness, if we understand the physical picture, the metaphor that he's using here, hunger and thirsting is usually evident. And the longer hunger and thirsting goes on, it gets more evident. Because some of you just get mean. If you're physically hungry, you get grumpy and mean. And so it's an evident thing. If you're hungering and thirsting for what is right, what is good, hungering and thirsting for the will of God, hungering and thirsting to stay away from sin, hungering and thirsting for that which is good and right, not only to be right, but to do right, then it's evident. It's just evident. Number two, it is a need. If hungry and thirsty physically would have communicated to them, oh, this is a need that we have. This is a need. If we're going to stay healthy, This is a need. This is not something that we can neglect if we want to stay healthy. We're talking about being a healthy church in Sunday school. To hunger and thirst for righteousness, to respond correctly, to live well. It's a need. It is a need. It's not just a nice little want to put on your resume. It is an absolute need for health. It also takes time. They certainly would have understood a meal unlike we would, a physical meal unlike we would have understood. Because how many of you can eat a full meal under 3 minutes? Some of y'all kids can, because we're just used to eating fast because we're busy. They would have known that to hunger and thirst for physical food, you sit down and you just take hours. You just take a long time to eat. There's no hurry. There's no hurry. And we can understand that now at the Sarver House because March Madness has been canceled, so there's nothing else to do to take your time and eat. They would have understood that to hunger and thirst for righteousness is not only for health, it is a need, but it is a need where you just stop everything and just take your time. How much more do we need to say? Okay, the hunger and thirst for righteousness as the body of Christ, Union Chapel, it's not going to happen in 3 to 4 minutes. It's not going to happen on an hour on Sunday. It's just not. Number 3 there, that it's fatal. It's not just a need, it's fatal. You're going to die a slow death if you don't physically eat and drink. And so they would have understood this metaphor that this is something fatal, and not to eat and drink is to die a slow death. You begin your body breaks down. You begin to make rash decisions. You begin to become a little delirious. How much so spiritually? Now, I'm not saying they understood all this. We're just trying to flesh it out a little bit. Maybe they didn't understand this at the time, but what this shows is what Jesus Christ is saying is this is serious. To hunger and to thirst for righteousness is serious of the church. It is worth you taking a risk. Think of somebody who is hungering and thirsting for physical food. They're willing to steal bread. They're willing to eat out of trash cans. They'll do whatever it takes to fill that need. Because if they don't, it is a life or death situation. And Jesus Christ is saying, you pursue me like that. Next, it is a focus. It is a single-mindedness. Somebody is hungry and thirsty. That's all they can think about, especially kids. The other things that are going on in the world and in their life, and whether they can do this or go here, or that doesn't matter now. They're hungry and thirsty. And it is the absolute focus of until it gets met. You think, clear your schedule. Change your life. Whatever it takes to meet that. However humiliating of a life you have to live to get that food and water, right? Being a beggar, do whatever it takes. That is the focus. It's a focus. It's a way of life. It's a single-mindedness. And then next, it's painful. If you've been hungry or thirsty for a long amount of time, it can be painful. And it's nagging. It's nagging. Sometimes you have a headache and you think, well, what I'll do is I'll just go to bed and I'll wake up and the headache will be gone. And sometimes you wake up and the headache's gone. Hunger doesn't work like that. Thirst doesn't work like that. The longer you don't feed and the longer you don't drink, the more painful and nagging it becomes physically. How much more spiritually? I hope it is that for followers of Christ. Here's the other thing is it's consistent. None of you all are going to go home and eat lunch and say, I think I'm good for the rest of the year. Okay? It doesn't even matter how good of a cook you have at your house. You're going to want to eat again for supper. Or at least breakfast. Right? It is a consistent thing to pursue, and they would have understand what he is talking about here. This righteousness, to not only be right, but to do right, is a consistent thing. Nobody says, got out of that temptation, good for the rest of my life. And so it is a consistent, ongoing thing. And then finally, maybe you can think of some more, but finally, it's exclusive. It's exclusive. If you're hungry and thirsty, physically hungry and thirsty, food and drink will do, nothing else. Try this. Don't try this. This would be cruel and borderline abuse. But if you were to take a baby screaming in the middle of the night, dying for the bottle, go to eat now, and you were to say, oh, honey, I got you a new toy, it's not going to work. Why? Because hunger and thirst is absolutely exclusive. And they would have understood that what Jesus Christ is saying about the rest of their lives and pursuing righteousness is a hunger and thirsting. It must be evident. It is an absolute need. It is fatal if not pursued. It is the focus of their minds. It's why they gather, why they do what they do. It is a nagging pain that they will have on this earth. It is consistent. It doesn't go away. And it is absolutely exclusive. And now we sit down and go, that's what the Christian life is. That's how we relate that. We have a new appetite, and so some of your old hungers and thirsts have to die. Does anybody know here what your old hungers are? Your old desires, your old passions, the things that you used to pursue. What takes up your time that shouldn't? What takes up your mind that shouldn't? What takes you away from being with the believers here? What moves you away from that? The rest of, particularly the books of the letters, the epistles, the Pauline epistles, Peter's epistles, are books that are written to say, here's how you hunger and thirst for righteousness. This is what it looks like. Now, they're not going to use necessarily this wording, but that's what it's going to. And here's what I notice in their letters. One another is repeated a lot of times. Your hunger and your thirst for righteousness, to pursue God, will not last long because you're too self-righteous if you're not around other believers, if you're not committed to one another. And I know that well enough because it's me. If I don't have you all, I can get up here. I'm good enough to fake a sermon. That should kind of frighten you. I'm good enough to fake this, I think. But if I don't have you, I'm going to become self-righteous. We all have these old hungers. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Do you have it? Do you have this approach to God and who He is? Like this? I drove by, I think it was a church sign. I can't even remember what it was, but all it said was, you matter to God. And those kind of sayings, I think, yeah, I think people like that. But I mean, hunger, I'm sure I matter to God, but I mean, really hunger, really thirst for Him. Where if His presence isn't there, you can't make it. Not it's just kind of nice to be buddy with Jesus, but if it's not there, you're not complete. You can't make it. You won't go on. You will do what it takes to hunger and thirst for righteousness. It is a willingness to be committed to the body. It is a willingness to talk about your sin. It's a willingness to talk about your old desires. It's a willingness to ask people for forgiveness. This is how we hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's a willingness to ask for help. When is the last time that you have heard me or anybody around you say, hey, will you pray for me? I really do not have the desire that I did a year ago. And will you just pray for me? When's the last time somebody's asked for prayer that they would hunger and thirst for righteousness? Hunger and thirst for God. Where do we see this in the Scripture? We see it first. We see it all over the place. We see with Moses when he said, show me your glory. Show me who you are. And it changed him. We see David is called a man after God's own heart, that righteousness lived out. We see the Apostle Paul in Philippians say, I want to know Him. Now, wait a minute. Doesn't he already? Isn't this the same guy that was blinded by Him, fallen to the ground, heard Him speak, wrote letters that we consider Holy Scripture? None of y'all done any of that. And he's saying, he has the he's either ignorant or he's hungry and thirsty for righteousness. I want to know him. Paul, haven't you had enough? I mean, come on, man. You had more than any of us in this church, and all you could think of is, I want more. I want more. I'm not going to make it if I don't. There's a type of golden corral buffet style when it comes to hungering and thirsting for God. There is a type of spiritual greediness where you look at God and the one thing you want, I got to have more. And if I don't have more, I won't make it. You're just not okay if you're not hungry and thirsty. And you'll do whatever it takes to get there. Let's look at the promise of the appetite. What a promise. What a bold promise. You hunger and thirst for this, and I promise you'll be satisfied. Who makes claims like that other than candy bars? Who makes claims like that and then backs it up? In the past, I've kind of wanted to call Snickers and go, look, I need like 4 or 5 to get even close to what you said. I want my money back. Jesus is making an incredible claim where he's saying, you will absolutely be 100% satisfied if you hunger and thirst for righteousness. The claims that Jesus makes are absolutely bold. And if he's not God, foolish. Satisfied. Do you want to start? Which song do you want to take? You want to take the Rolling Stones and I'll do U2? Or what are you thinking? You want to do the... I'm more of a U2 guy than a Rolling Stone guy. You could sing the songs about I can't get no satisfaction, or I still haven't found what I'm looking for. You can sing those. You can feel the drive of our modern philosophers and music and movies around us looking and seeking satisfaction. Maybe the reason why I'm so anxious or so fearful or so apathetic to the things of Christ, maybe the reason why is I'm hungry and thirsty for the wrong things. I know it all up here, but here, I mean, it's just not there. It's not my appetite like it once was. And maybe that's why we're such an anxious people. Maybe that's the reason why we're trying to be satisfied with things that have no business satisfying us, however good they are. Here's the paradox of this satisfying. When you're satisfied, guess what you want to go biblically? Guess the way that this word is working and the way this phrase works. It says you'll be satisfied, so much so that you'll keep hungry and thirsty. And wait a minute, I thought you said I'd be satisfied. Why would I have to continue to hunger and thirst? Because there's so much more. You have no clue that the one who is able to work in you can do so much more than you can even think or imagine. So when you're satisfied, you go right back. It's like going back to your favorite restaurant. You go right back there because it's got the best food. It's got the best drink. We go over and over and over again. That's why we don't do church services once a year. That's why our home groups are every week and not once every 6 months. I want you to be satisfied. I want a hunger to be stirred in you. What are we teaching our children that they will be satisfied by? What are we raising our children to pursue and to be satisfied by? Man, if you're a parent, you've wrestled with that. I've wrestled with things that man, I really want my children involved in this, but I don't know. You've wrestled with what are we teaching our children to be satisfied from? Self-righteousness? Or other things that promise to satisfy? Jesus is going to go on, and he's going to teach something pretty remarkable from this. He's going to continue his teaching. And he's going to teach them that you have to hunger and thirst. And then he's going to say, on the bread. That's what they would have understood as food. On the bread. On the drink. He's going to teach them specifically, John records this, he's going to teach them, I am the bread, I'm what you want. What? I'm the living water. You'll never thirst, but you'll keep coming back. And he can teach that because what his food was to do the will of his Father. You remember when he said that? My food is to do the will of the one who sent. And the will of the one who sent him will lead him to a garden. Well, Jesus Christ, fully man, will wrestle with the will of the Father. Only to drink the cup of wrath. If it's possible you take this cup from me, what is he saying? If it's possible that you could get rid of this drink, I don't want to drink that. His appetite was the Father's will that led him to drink the cup of wrath. That Jesus Christ on the cross will become our unrighteousness so that we would not only be positionally righteous, but that we would crave it. That we would want it. And as Christ, God the Son, died, he will satisfy the wrath of God. He will satisfy the law's demands. What do you think the disciples thought of when they heard hunger and thirst for righteousness? My guess is they thought, oh yeah, the law, the Ten Commandments. We have to hunger and thirst for that. We need to learn it better. We need to do a better job. And Jesus is going to go on to say, it's too late. You can't do a better job. You hunger and thirst after me. Because I will fulfill the law. And only through me will it be satisfied and fulfilled. And only through me will God the Father be satisfied so that you can be satisfied with your new appetite. So church, pursue righteousness. Hunger and thirst for it. Whether there's such a thing as coronavirus or not. Whether you get it or not. We look at our circumstances and maybe they're good, maybe they're not. But in the midst of that, we can be people that say, I don't really care. I'm hungry and thirsting for what is right. And ultimately, that is Jesus Christ who became unrighteousness for me and satisfied the will of God that I might be satisfied with him. Righteousness is the person of Jesus Christ. Go after him. Let's pray. Father, I pray that we would understand righteousness. That our food can now be to do the will of the one who sent us. Thank you for these pictures we get of things like communion that remind us to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Lord, I pray that we would not only be right, but we would do right because we love you and because we are already right with you. I pray we would live out what we claim. But I pray we would live it out in such a way that we're hungry and thirsty. And so there are people here, there are hearts here who need to be charged. For whatever reason, they need to be charged. There's no real hunger. There's no real thirst. There's no real satisfaction. I pray that by your Spirit you would do it now. In Christ we pray.